Well, in our previous video, we were looking at types of security, and that was particularly with firewalls. Obviously, what plays a huge role as well, because we said malware is not just to necessarily disrupt your computer, but also from a security measure in terms of creating backdoors and stealing information, etc., etc. So antivirus software and security software in general, obviously critical to have it and critical to update it, and that's the important thing, and that's what we're going to just talk about briefly here, is why there is a need to do that. Okay, because antivirus software now has expanded more into sort of a antivirus stroke security software, and as I say, it could look for a variety of threats, including keyloggers, in other words, applications that record and monitor what keystrokes you're typing. The Trojan horses, we said, are applications that look useful but contain malware, worms that replicate themselves, rootkits, which install themselves embed themselves in the operating system and allow what we call backdoors into the system. Spyware, keylogger is a type of spyware, software that monitors not only your surfing habits and reports it elsewhere, but also looks for confidential information. And then, of course, ransomware, which has become a critical issue, is where people's information has been held to ransom. So it gets encrypted, and you can't access that information unless you pay a ransom, typically in Bitcoin type of thing. So, how do we pick up these things? Okay, so the idea with the antivirus program is it's very similar to biological viruses, in that in a biological virus, how do you detect it? Well, it leaves telltale signs, and I'm on shaky ground with my knowledge of life sciences, but it leaves certain things in the bloodstream, and it affects the cells in different ways and things like that, so it can be identified. And that's why during the COVID process, we keep on looking for new variants, okay, because they do evolve exactly the same with virus software, okay, or with viruses, or any malware for that matter. Okay, so you look for malicious patterns, okay, or known patterns, more like. So in other words, the software says, okay, if I see this, then I know it's that type of, okay, something's been changed in this file, or it gets changed to this pattern, whatever it happens to be. But it needs to be updated because it recognizes the virus based on what we call definitions, and those virus definitions are, if you like to think, almost the blueprint of all the different viruses that exist and their variants. So as new ones come out, those definitions need to be updated so that they can be detected. You can schedule scans to automatically run for you, but your antivirus software these days generally stays in memory and it's active all the time, simply because you don't want to, after a month, suddenly discover that you've actually had virus activity on your computer. So generally they're running what we call real time, or they have an auto protect shield, as we sometimes refer to it, just a fancy way of saying it monitors all the time. You can obviously scan particular drives now and again, so technically before you put any type of device into your computer, external storage device like a flash drive or a hard drive, you should be scanning it, because you don't know what's actually on that, particularly coming from somebody else as well. And then what it does, it will try and remove any malicious code that it detects. Okay, so depending on the settings, you'll be notified and it will ask you what you want to do with it. The other concept that comes up here is the idea of quarantine. Okay, think about quarantine, what it means in terms of normal viruses. Okay, if we quarantine somebody, we put them in a separate place so that they can't actually infect anybody. So the idea is, particularly with people that you can't immediately give them some treatment and they're fine, we need to keep them and isolate them, and we've obviously had examples of that over the last few years. So the idea, the same thing can happen with if the antivirus cannot safely remove the malicious code from the disk or memory or wherever it's scanning, it can put the virus into what's called quarantine. So it puts it into an area on the disk that nobody else can access. Okay, so it's an isolated area on the disk, and it just puts it there, and then often you can notify the antivirus or it will automatically notify the antivirus providers, and as soon as they've got something that can deal with that, you can then quarantine, you can then maybe apply your new antivirus definitions to it, or you can simply delete it from quarantine. Okay, so quarantine is an aspect where it's put safely on one side, so that it doesn't infect anything else by preventing other people from accessing it. Okay, so that's just the idea, and that's the reason why all the security software needs to be updated, because new variants are coming out daily. Would probably be too easy a word, probably hourly, in terms of the sheer number of variants that there are. Right. The other thing to do is validating who's using your computer, or who's accessing the computer, and if they're not a computer themselves. Okay, because computers can be programmed to access other computers, and so they often have this test which we call CAPTCHAs. I'm not going to begin to try and remember what it stands for, but basically to test that the person's not a robot. In other words, is there a human being on the other side of this when they're trying to log on? That's actually what it's trying to test. Okay, and the typical ones are giving you these weird characters and text that you've got to try and decipher, some of which takes me about 3 or 4 attempts to even work out what it is. The other one, of course, the type of thing is where they give you a series of images and they say select all the images that have got a road in it, or traffic lights or something. So to try and weed out to ensure that it's in fact a user, that's person that's actually accessing the computer, and not a computer that's going to try and hack into the system. The interesting articles that we're reading these days, as they're saying, is because computers are becoming so sophisticated, the use of a CAPTCHA might be quite limited now in going forward, particularly is because with artificial intelligence, pretty much anything that a human being can scan, a computer can be programmed to scan as well. So while it's still very prevalent, it's used in a lot of systems, particularly when you're registering for, say, email addresses. And that's one of the things they do, is because they can get, if you can get a computer to automatically register thousands of email addresses, it can be used for spam attacks and all sorts of things. So it is a measure. It's not a foolproof measure that we're looking at. And that, I think, will sum up everything for the chapter. So it's quite a nice, easy chapter, and you can just test yourself in terms of the questions that come up in terms of what you need to know with it.